the smell of death on some, the smell of terrible sickness if you've ever been around it. And then it could be almost difficult for others in a meeting to focus on anything except these terribly suffering people. Yeshua has these crowds coming they come running, carrying sick people and lame and demonized in every type of situation that you would not want to be around, and he gives himself to it completely. He was known for it, carrying our pain. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. In point of fact, many of the religious leaders did despise him. In point of fact, the boast of the anti-missionaries that the religious leaders knew better and never followed him, aside from being quite an overstatement, because it was not all of the religious leaders, many did despise him. Many did mock him. Many questioned his credentials. Surely, now speaking specifically of his redemptive love, of his sacrifice on our behalf, surely he took up our infirmities, carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. Let's just say, this is the kings of the nations speaking, let's just say that somehow it could apply to Jewish suffering. Let's just say. I gave you a couple of reasons why that couldn't be. Let's just say it could. But he was pierced for our transgressions. The kings of the nations as a whole are going to say that. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Just tell me where, pray tell, God ever gave Israel this mission? Where he ever spoke of this as their particular calling? Where he said it was their destiny as a people, as a nation? The righteous one within them, the Messiah, as a priestly king, can certainly do these things. But as a nation, couldn't be, because there's a national covenant. But let's take it further. Where does it say that Israel as a priestly nation is actually going to suffer on behalf of the people? Nowhere. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds we are healed, or by his wounds we were healed. Can I ask you a question? How did the punishment that was on Israel bring peace to the nations? Same point I raise again. Hasn't happened. The only way, look, hear the strength of our position. We can say this has already happened as written. The anti-missionary view says, well, one day it'll happen. We know it hasn't yet, but one day. Well, the very thing we're criticized for all the time, putting something off into the future. Well, because Jesus didn't do what he was supposed to, you had to create the second coming. He's going to come back and do it. Wait a second. I'm saying he did this exactly. And it's been experienced by kings and rulers and nations and multitudes of people around the world who've come to this extraordinary revelation. I remember in my own life, just 16 and a half years old, brand new, believing any of this. December 17th, 71, a date I alluded to earlier this morning. When it hit me, God loved me enough to send his son to die for me. I didn't understand the messianic implications and the Jewishness of the message. I didn't understand any of that point. Here I am playing in the mud. It's like he came down and washed me and cleansed me. And there I am going back and playing in the mud. And then I said, God, that's it. I'll never put a needle in my arm again. The guilt was gone. The power of the thing was broken. This is powerful stuff when you're shooting heroin and just living for the needle and all of this and so absorbed with a worldly lifestyle to just have it broken. And to realize he did that for me so I can be free and healed. We don't have to try to figure out one day, somewhere, somehow, this will happen. It's happened. It's happened. Kulanu katson ta'ina. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. This verse begins and ends with kulanu, all of us. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Each has turned to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Notice that's Yahweh, that's Israel's God. Again, the notion that the Gentiles using these terms, the Gentile kings, is just such a wild proposal. Consider this. Isn't this testimony here, we all like sheep have gone astray, each of us turned to his own way? Isn't that the testimony of the human race? Is that an exclusively Gentile testimony? Is not this the testimony of our own people in Scripture? Doesn't Solomon, when he prays in 1 Kings 8, talk about everybody knows the plague of his heart and there's not one among us who doesn't sin? This is not just the testimony of Gentile nations. If Israel has laid on the iniquity of the Gentiles, then where is Israel's iniquity laid? If the principle is that Israel, somehow being united with the rest of the human race, suffers vicariously or in a representative way for the rest of the nations because everyone else has sinned and Israel bears the punishment, then who bears the punishment for Israel's sins? Simply doesn't work. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Each has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him, this individual, the iniquity of us all. Yes, sometimes the nation is spoken of in individual language, but this sustained, clear prophecy about an individual, where the previous verses speaking of the servant of the Lord have clearly spoken about an individual. Here, this individual suffers for the sins of the nation, the people as a whole. We thought, now just put this back, let's read this in Jewish terms. We, the prophet speaking for his people, we didn't understand it. We thought he was suffering for his own sins. We thought he was some criminal or some rebel or something. The ancient rabbinic testimony, to the extent it does speak of Jesus, would basically speak of him as a deceiver. Others have looked at him as a rebel against Rome or whatever it is. But he died for his own foolishness, his own sin. Had nothing to do with us. And then the light goes on. Surely it was our pains, our sicknesses he was carrying and bearing. We didn't understand it. Now we see it. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Oh, wait a second. He did open his mouth. He's led like a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. No. He cried out on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? From Psalm 22. Some have even said it's blasphemous, though. He would cry that out on the cross. The thing that's so interesting is that the people like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who wanted to model principles of nonviolent resistance and being like lambs before their persecutors, modeled themselves on the life of Jesus. You just have anyone read that, any Christian read it, that's Jesus. Well, haven't you read in the New Testament that he cried out on the cross? Well, hang on. I'm not trying to get picky here. But he did not resist arrest. He did not fight. When his disciples went to fight, he shut them down. He did not resist in his trial. He didn't try to come up with crafty arguments. He, when he was crucified, showed no resistance. There's not a word of him uttering a sound as he's being nailed to the cross and strung up to die. If anybody fulfills this, look, Jeremiah says of himself that he's like a lamb going to the slaughter. In other words, no idea it's coming. Jeremiah was anything but silent, and yet he's talking about, boy, I didn't even know they were after me like this at the end of the 11th chapter of Jeremiah. Here it is an amazing thing. That's one of the things that got their attention at the trial. Don't you want to defend yourself? Open your mouth and say something. No defense. This is my simple statement.